Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is Take the Lead, Change the Game, a podcast for women leaders looking to deepen their knowledge and skills and find enjoyment in the process. We're powered by Safra Leadership. Safra Leadership is a cohort-based coaching experience designed to fuel courage and ignite impact among women professionals. I'm Lindsay Goldford-Gray, and I'm here with my co-host, Mindy Gulati, and our special guest, Cherisse Robison. Mindy and I are the founders of Safra. Together, we bring a blend of leadership coaching, strategy, and lived experience to help women navigate challenges, seize opportunities, and lead with confidence. I'm excited to introduce you to our guest today, Cherisse Robison, who has served as the Chief Financial Officer for Girl Scouts of Central Texas for about 5 years. She's currently undergoing an exciting transition and will become the Chief Financial Officer of the Texas Tribune here in just a short few weeks. She's a dear friend of mine, and we're excited to welcome her today to talk about her experience living a dual reality of a largely male-dominated space of executive finance in a predominantly female world, which is nonprofit leadership. So welcome, Cher.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored that you all would have me on.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you. So I want to kick us off and ask, what is it like being a woman in a largely male-dominated finance role of CFO, while also living out that role in a largely female-dominated nonprofit sector?
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. And, we think about it a lot, like in terms of like a dual reality, right? Like you're in this, like you said, kind of a male-dominated finance space, but working in a largely female-dominated nonprofit sector. And I'll share that, it's been such a joy having my career really in the nonprofit space because I've been able to come across so many amazing women leaders in this space. And, you can have a whole other podcast, right, on like, why are there so many women leaders in nonprofit? And we can talk about how it's under-resourced and underpaid, but that's another topic, right? But I'll share a story that I love to tell, which is my husband is also in the nonprofit foundation space. And one time he came home from work and he said, I went to lunch with the new CEO of XYZ nonprofit. I was like, oh, great. What's her name? And he was like, it's a guy this time. It's a man. And I was like, oh, wow, good for him. Right. And it was just like, we had a good laugh and it was just a funny role reversal. But it is really funny that, that was my natural default, just to assume it was a female, because I've been around so many amazing women leaders in the nonprofit space. So, but I do see that kind of dual reality of, in my job as a CFO and being in finance, it's a predominantly male-dominated environment, at least at the executive finance level. And how that's kind of played out in my career in the nonprofit space is at the board meetings, there's more male leaders there in my finance committee, audit, investment. And what's interesting is, being a woman in finance, I've found that there is this need sometimes to prove your credibility, right? And being in the woman in the room, the woman in charge, maybe you're called upon to kind of prove your credibility more than maybe a male counterpart would. So there's the idea of, feeling the pressure to be technically flawless at all times, right? I think, Lindsay, at one point you shared, right, not being just competent, but undeniable, right? Like no one can question you. You have all the answers so that you feel prepared and you're prepared beyond your peers too. I remember, I think one of my first finance committee meetings when I first started out as a CFO, I probably over prepared for 10 hours, right? Just looking at every single account, every single transaction, just in case somebody asked me a question about that one thing so that I would have that answer. And, maybe if you were a male in this environment, you wouldn't feel that pressure, right? I think I've gotten better about it over the years. I've feel like I've earned the trust and I have more confidence in myself, but that was definitely something I faced early on. There's also the communication side of it too, right? And not to gender stereotype, but being a female in a room with mostly men who are very powerful men, maybe in their own industries and finance, it was common to be interrupted at times, right? Not in my current state, many years ago, in my current situation, but you had to really learn how to be assertive if you were interrupted, right? How do you insert yourself back in and make that point? Also, kind of focusing on worrying about being too direct. Because, maybe sometimes men can say certain things, but if a woman were to say that, she's seen as aggressive, right? So how do I calibrate my tone to make sure my message is being heard, but not being written off as too dramatic or too aggressive? So that's something I feel like I've had to navigate over the years and figure out, how to do that. But some of the hardest parts is, that's the finance committee and the board meetings, which don't always happen that frequently. The most time I spend is with my female executive teams over the years, and then the day-to-day in the nonprofit world. So you kind of have to put on that other hat and be a finance person, which sometimes if you go into finance, you might find yourself, typically you're analytical, you're task driven, maybe sometimes to the point, right? And you might be stepping into a space with female leaders that you find more relationship-based leadership, right? Which, building relationships and trust is really important. Emotional intelligence is highly valued. It's a more collaborative environment. So if I'm asked to be one thing in a finance committee meeting, I have to remember to put on my other hat and be something else in another meeting, and making sure I'm doing that authentically as well, right? And not just putting on an appearance or a guise to meet the times. So, I think a lot of it is I have to really be mindful to not fall into my finance default of logic, data, process when I'm in those day-to-day meetings, and really keep the qualitative and the mission in mind. And I think over the years, working on my emotional intelligence has really helped that a lot.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing that. And emotional intelligence is often one of those skills that executives really have to have, but they don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. So I'm happy you're bringing that up. You sit at the intersection of data and empathy, to bring up a bit of emotional intelligence. How do you translate a rigid budget or financial audit into a story that inspires your team rather than deflating them or making it too technical?
Yeah. I like how you said that, like inspiring your team. And I think that can be hard with numbers and data, right? And a lot of times people in the finance role don't see that as their job, right? They're like, no, I just report the data, and then the inspiration, that's the CEO's job. But I think if you really want people to listen to you and to trust what you're saying, you do have to find a way to inspire them. So I think, being a woman provides me a unique advantage as a CFO in that setting, right? I mean, to some degree, and by working on my emotional intelligence, I innately understand how I might need to communicate the message in a way that can be genuinely heard. So, I think what maybe has been successful for me in my career is really connecting the financials to the why, right? So if we're asking the team or having to ask the team to cut expenses or control costs, it's not just like, well, GAAP says that we need to cut expenditures and, we need to keep our receipts. Like that's a good reason, right? But connecting it back to making sure that the organization is here to serve its clients for years to come and not just today, right? We really need to be fiscally responsible so that we can be around for 50 years, 100 years in order to serve our mission like Girl Scouts has. And one thing I wanted to point out too is that we often think about finance and CFOs on the expenditure side, right? And cutting costs and controlling and things like that. But I think this inspiration can also really happen on the revenue side. And that gives CFOs a lot of opportunity to be that storyteller as well. And I think back to an example many, many years ago, early in my career. And there was a program in an organization I was working at that was revenue generating. And it was actually very successful. It was bringing in a lot of revenue. And then when I came in, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And I was looking back at the past year historicals, and I was seeing that each year it would exceed its revenue targets, its budget pretty significantly each year. And so while I appreciated that manager's drive to be conservative as a fiscal person, I'm like, yeah, that's great. She was being very conservative and not putting out there her stretch goals. She was putting out there what she thought was accomplishable. And she was under promising and over delivering. But I think in a way it was too significant, right? And so we were able to work together and really say, and I think this was coming maybe from a place of fear, right? Like if her feeling like she carried too much responsibility, and what if I miss this? It's a big portion of our revenue. Everybody's going to be really upset with me, right? But we were able to reframe it in terms of, well, I appreciate you being conservative, but what are we not doing from a mission perspective? Who did we not serve last year? What did we not do because we weren't ready or we were too afraid to take that calculated risk? So I think being able to paint that picture of what can we do versus what can't we do can really inspire people to want to pay attention to the finances and really keep that in mind. So I think you do want to grow, and expand our mission, and we need to do it in a way that keeps the lights on. So really just helping people understand that story.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's interesting because I completely agree that oftentimes the finance person is viewed, or maybe is like we got to cut expenses, we got to cut. And it's like, well, there's two levers we can pull here, right? Like not just one. And so, growth and outreach and like serving more people is certainly part of it. So, we've talked about sort of this dual reality, and you have to be deeply empathetic, but also really firm on the budgets and the numbers. So, Mindy's question was about how you translate that. I'm asking more like, how do you hold that tension yourself in terms of like warmth, mission driven, but also like, I've got to toe a line here, that in a space that's mainly relationally driven and people are not analyzing things as much.
Right. Well, it's a really great question. I like how you framed it too. And it's interesting too. I think I told someone this recently. I intentionally entered the nonprofit space. Like I had a business degree and I knew I wanted to focus on finance, but within the community space, within nonprofits. So I didn't just kind of fall into it. So I felt like at heart, I've always had mission and community at mind. I just happen to have a finance brain and use those skills in this space. So it is a real tension. And I'm sure as your own, solo entrepreneurs and business leaders yourself, like you often have to balance that tension too. But early on in my career, I think I took having to be the cop, right? Or the heavy in the room. I took it a little too personally, maybe because I do feel like I had such a mission focus. So I distinctly remember working with a team early on, and they were pushing back on me about maybe cutting cost or having to say no to an idea. And I think I got a little flustered, and I said, hey guys, I care about kids too, because that was our mission, was children. And they were like, Cherisse, we know this. We know that you have a mission. And so I think I was projecting like, they think I don't care about kids because I'm saying no. I was like, and so that was a kind of an eye opener for me of like, okay, they know, they trust that I do have mission at heart. I think what's been really successful for me and our teams in recent years is the yes and approach. I'm so grateful for Tina Fey to introducing a lot of us to that concept, that improv concept when she wrote her book. I think we approach it at a lot of my organizations of yes, we do want to serve our clients or our customers or our members with the highest level of service possible and the best services we can. And here are the resources and the constraints we are currently working with. What can we achieve with these current level of resources and these constraints? Or to your point, Lindsay, what can we do to grow our resources, right? So that we can do more, right? And that's kind of more fun to talk about too. So it's not always about cost cutting. It's about what can we do? So again, I wouldn't say I was always really good at this early on in my career though, right? Like I said, finance is often seen as the cop or the heavy in the room, the person that always says no to keep people in check. And that can be hard, right? But an interesting kind of caveat I felt, or a take on it, was I was worried sometimes that if I said yes, that the team would assume that they were given carte blanche, right? Like their job was to convince me because I'm always saying no. So if they convince me, they're like, well, it must be a pretty good argument. So I'm going to go do whatever I want, right? And so I often said no a lot, right? Because out of that fear that was my job, I had to be the heavy. But when I started kind of saying and employing the yes and approach, I feel like I became a much more effective leader because I was building upon the ideas that they brought to the table and I wasn't just shutting them down. And I don't think I realized as well that I probably was being kept out of certain meetings or I wasn't being invited to the table, right? To really impact strategic decisions and strategy because I was the no person, right? But if you show up differently and you say, yeah, we do have constraints. We do have real things that we have to work with. What can we do with this? Yes, and I really think it makes a big difference. So that was a really, really big learning opportunity for me early in my career.
Yeah, I heard I was talking to a general counsel for a startup, and she had a similar take where it was like, your job as general counsel is to be a risk mitigator. But if you say no to everything that's asked of you, you're not going to be very effective. Like you can't have zero risk. Like that's just, you can, but then you're going to do nothing.
Right. Yeah, it really is that risk approach, right? Of like, what risk are you willing to take on? And like you said, you can mitigate almost all risk, but you're not achieving your mission. You're kind of hiding in a hole and you're safe, but you're not really doing interesting things.
Yeah. I like that. And there's a lot of healthy risk too. So, and I think that CFOs and general counsel can tend to just be like, we can't take any risks or we got to be so careful, but then you miss out on a lot of opportunities. So that's important. Yeah. As someone who obviously has been an executive and a leader, and then worked alongside a lot of executives and leaders, what are some major lessons that you've learned as a leader that you think are important to share with our audience?
Yeah. Oh, so many, right? So many lessons learned.
Yeah, that's a hard question because it could go on and on. So.
Right. I think kind of what I touched upon earlier, it's that you can be direct and kind. You can be analytical and mission driven. You can be both. There is a tension there. It's hard. But you really can make hard decisions and still care about kids. Like, you can do both. So I think that is really important to keep in mind, because I do see that early on in my career, and maybe people who are just starting out in finance, you come in pretty heavy handed, right? And this is how it needs to be, and only this way or that way, or black and white. And there is an and there. You have to figure out a way to balance both things. Along the same lines with relationship is about building credibility intentionally, right? And so we have, when you come into a job or a role, you have all of the skill set in your bag of tricks, right? Your skills, your competency, your education, who you know. And those skills and your education and what you've done is really important, but those relationships are really key, and building those relationships are key. And I think about it, I guess, in two ways, but within the organization, it's really, really important for finance individuals to work on those relationships. And I say that, number one, because not to stereotype, but we're not always good at it, right? It's maybe, again, we're process analytical, driven with data and spreadsheets. I'm just getting excited even talking about it right now. And it isn't always, it's secondary sometimes. But so much of finance is trust, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you are in front of individuals, your colleagues or your board or your finance committee, and they're asking you to present complicated financial information. Maybe they don't understand it, or maybe, that's not their expertise, and they don't have the time to go dig through the general ledger, right? You don't want them to, but you don't have time to dig through it and really understand it. So they're trusting you to present this information and to make recommendations. If you haven't built up that credibility and that relationship and that trust, they may not trust your recommendations, right? And especially if you're asking them to do hard things, they may be like, why am I going to do that for you, right? But if they know me and I've taken the time to build that relationship and build that trust when I'm asking them to do the hard thing, they're like, yeah, I know Cherisse has the best interest at heart. I know her work product. I know she's thorough. And I trust that when she's bringing me this recommendation, we can debate it, but I trust that that's maybe the direction we need to go. So I think that's a big life lesson for me, is like how much I need to focus on relationships when my default is to stay in my spreadsheet land.
I love that. Yeah, that's important for everyone. So relationships can't be, they take some time, and they can't be really replicated with something else. So,
right.
Yeah, for sure. All right, I'm going to ask you our signature closing question, which is, if you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would you tell yourself?
Oh, I love this question. And it got me thinking about little baby CFO Cher, back in the day. What would I do? And especially as I've embarked upon this next transition that I'm about to take. And I think I would say to myself, you're good enough, right? Like, you're good enough to do this. I think it's really easy to doubt yourself in your first big leadership role. And we all know that women do this more than men, right? I think what's the statistic about when women look at a job description, they ensure that they have 80% of the skills listed before they apply, versus men are like 40% or something to that effect. So I really think there's a tendency, and I suffered from this, to think that if we don't have all the skills and we haven't experienced all the situations before, we haven't done the job yet, then we shouldn't be doing the job, right? So I would just say, don't fall into that trap. Right? They hired you to do the job because they think you can do it, or they promoted you because they think you can do it. Trust that. Rely upon the skills and competencies, the relationships that you've built to get to this point, and the confidence that you have, or from the experience, right, that you've done the job, really comes in your 40s and your 50s, or whenever you take that second or your third job. So it'll come. So don't listen to that imposter syndrome. Don't say that you're not good enough. You are. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in the seat. You wouldn't be in the room. And believe that you're good enough, and go forth and do good.
I love that. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah. I'm a fast talker, so I may not have, gotten 30 minutes, but
no, all of it was so good. it covered a lot of topics that Mindy and I talk about regularly on the podcast. So we're really feel very fortunate to have you on. So
yeah, thank you for being here with us.
I really appreciate what you all are doing. Is really important work, and empowering women. You know, I've been able to work in the girl courage, confidence, and character leadership space with Girl Scouts for the past 5 years. So I know it's so important, and I've seen such amazing girls that have come up through our program and the amazing women I work with. And so the work that you all are doing to continue that is just really impressive. So thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Bye, everyone.